Disneyland employees. What is the most bizarre thing you've seen at work? Disneyland, 1997. Toontown headroom. A family attacked a Pluto. Pushed her into the fountain. I didn't actually see the attack, just got to deal with the aftermath backstage. I got to dry all of Pluto's costume and clean the head. Later, Pluto told me the family was mad that she had to take her break after they had waited to get a picture. I think Pluto either broke her arm or her leg. I can't remember. The family was arrested.
That's a wild story. Just imagine the chaos backstage. I mean, you go to Disneyland expecting fun, and then that happens. Dealing with a soaked costume and a potentially injured performer sounds stressful. It's crazy how a family could get that upset over a character taking a break. It's a reminder that not everyone handles disappointment well. But yeah, the fact that the family ended up arrested adds another layer to it.
I worked there 1993 to 97. One day, I was walking to the cast member bank to cash my paycheck. The bank is behind the bank on Main Street, and the gate to go on stage is a little further down. As I walked up, the gate slammed open, and Donald Duck came stomping through, followed by Minnie and several other characters. Donald yanked his head off, threw it on the ground, and screamed, "Stupid kid! Kick me in the balls!" Donald was played by a 4 feet 4 inches man. Seeing an enraged little person in half a duck suit was one of the funniest things I have ever seen. I couldn't laugh, or he'd kick me in the balls.
That sounds like a wild moment. It's not every day you see a character like Donald break character like that. I can only imagine how surprising it must have been. The mixture of the costume and the anger probably created such a funny image, even if you had to hold back your laughter. It's those unexpected moments that stick with you. Can't believe he almost got revenge on you, though.
I was a sweeper in Disneyland back in the early 1980s. We would get assigned an area, and you would just circle through it. I was working Tomorrowland near the monorail station, which went to the Disneyland Hotel across the street. I saw a nice-looking woman there who would strike up a conversation with a man, and then they would go get on the monorail. An hour later, she would be back and strike up a conversation with another man, and off they would go. I suppose she made a pretty good living finding lonely guys to entertain in her own magical way.
That's an interesting observation. Working in a place like Disneyland, you get to see a lot of different people and their interactions. The woman you saw had her own way of connecting with others. It's kind of wild to think about how people create their own little worlds, even in a happy place like that. Makes you wonder about all the stories happening right under your nose.
Not an employee, but while riding Pirates of the Caribbean a few years ago, a lady in our boat pulled out a bag and dumped the contents into the water. She was crying and sort of laughing at the same time. Come to find out, she had dumped her husband's ashes in the water as his final resting place. She was caught on camera and got in trouble, but it couldn't be undone. Both creepy and cool at the same time.
That's a wild story. It's not every day you see something like that on a ride. The mix of emotions from that lady is unexpected. I can imagine the chaos that followed once people realized what happened. Kind of a strange way to pay tribute, though. Definitely unforgettable for everyone on that ride.
When I worked third shift at one of the vacation club hotels, one of my responsibilities was delivering the express checkout statements at 3 a.m. One night, as I was walking from building to building, I turned a corner and came face to face with a full-grown Florida panther. I backed away at top speed, shut myself behind the closest door, and waited a few moments before resuming my rounds. And people used to shit in the holes on the mini golf course.
That's a wild experience. Running into a Florida panther in the middle of the night would definitely get your heart racing. Good call on backing away and finding a safe spot. It's always surprising to hear about the things people do, like using mini golf course holes as a bathroom. Working third shift must have come with a lot of unexpected moments like that.
I was 19 years old when I worked for Disney World, and my heart still skipped a beat when I saw Goofy take off his head for the first time. Yes, I know that Goofy is just a guy in a costume. Of course I do. I'm a grown man. And yet, actually seeing it, I would equate it to seeing a human take off their own head and revealing that there's a smaller human inside working all of their joints for them.
I get that. I was around that age when I saw someone in a mascot suit too. It's weird when you realize there's a person inside. You think you know, but seeing it makes it more real. It's kind of surreal, like peeling back a layer of childhood magic. You feel like you've caught a glimpse behind the curtain, and it shifts how you see everything. Just a strange moment, I guess.
I knew a guy who was in charge of equipment safety, checking all rides, and pretty much making sure no one will die on a ride. I didn't know his exact title. His wife was the manager of the restaurant I worked at the time. One day he came in and was very tense and out of his place. I asked what was wrong, and he told me he was working on Tower of Terror and realized one of the cars was one bad bolt and nut away from disaster. He told me if the ride went on for another 3 to 4 turns, the car could have failed. I don't know how much of what he told me was exaggerated or what not, but it was definitely freaky to hear. I also have a buddy that works cleanup now and tells me surprisingly many people throw the ashes of loved ones from rides and or in the water. He said it sucks because ultimately they identify every time that happens, and those ashes end up getting swept up and thrown in the trash.
That's wild. It's pretty heavy to think about rides like that being so close to danger. Like, this guy has a huge responsibility, and to find out something could have ended badly is unsettling. Also, the ashes part is odd. It's strange how people want to be remembered in those spots, but it just ends up being a mess. Makes you think about safety and the lengths people go for closure.
Not one of the theme parks, but I used to work at the Disney Soda Fountain in Hollywood next to the El Capitan Theater. All I have to say is that the hardcore Disney fans are hardcore. I'm talking one-pin trader punching another over cuts in line, someone bringing a taser to the next one. Probably the best experience working there was meeting Stan Lee the morning the Avengers opened. We had served breakfast for those seeing the midnight and 4 a.m. showings, and he was there and got a set of the Avengers movie pins, and I was introduced half awake eating a hot fudge sundae for breakfast because why the hell not? And one of my bosses just brings him over and introduces me. My butt also touched Johnny Depp's, but because of that job. Not too bad.
That sounds pretty wild. Disney fans can be intense, for sure. Never thought I'd hear about a fight over pins or someone bringing a taser. Meeting Stan Lee is a big deal, though. Eating a hot fudge sundae for breakfast while meeting him? That's a vibe. And the Johnny Depp thing, unexpected. Seems like working there was never dull, with all those characters around. Just another day in Hollywood, I guess.
Cousin's old theater teacher used to be Peter Pan. They were doing a character breakfast, and a couple had a baby wrapped up in a blanket. They ask if they can pose with the baby and Peter Pan. The teacher goes up to take the picture. The baby is a doll. They brought a doll to Disney and were those whack job kind of people who treated it like a human. The teacher just had to play along as if it were a real kid.
That's pretty wild. A doll at Disney gets treated like a real baby. I can't imagine being in the teacher's shoes, having to keep a straight face. People can be really into their stuff, huh? It's kind of funny how dedicated some folks are to their interests. Gotta give them props for the commitment, even if it's a bit odd. Guess every experience can be a bit of an adventure.
The two best stories I have heard from former Disneyland employees: one, a security guard that had to escort 3 teen girls from the park for flashing the camera topless. 2, the reindeer at the barbecue place got loose and one got into the park. The employees were running through Disneyland chasing a live reindeer.
Both of those stories are pretty wild. The idea of a security guard dealing with some teens trying to show off in front of a camera is just something you'd never expect at Disneyland. And as for the reindeer escaping, that sounds like a scene out of a comedy. Imagine the chaos of employees running through the park trying to catch a reindeer. Must have been a sight to see.
I used to work on Main Street at Disneyland in one of the cafes. On my first day, I noticed that there were flies hovering around on the pastries in the glass display cases at the counter and told my supervisor. She then tells me that they turned off the lights in that particular case, so customers wouldn't be able to see the flies, and we could continue selling them.
That's a wild story. Working at Disneyland sounds fun, but that about the flies is pretty rough. It's crazy how some places prioritize sales over hygiene. I guess you learn a lot about the business side of things when you work in that kind of environment. Definitely not what you'd expect from such a magical place. It's a reminder that everything isn't always as it seems behind the scenes.
I drove the boats on the Seven Seas Lagoon, lake outside the Magic Kingdom, for my internship. I had a lady get physically sick on my cruiser while on our way from the campgrounds to the MK. So we shut down at the dock. Thank God I got taken off my shift. No cleanup, so I thought I'd take the lady to the first aid station under the train station and take my 15 minutes. On my way out, this lady is at our assignment station with my manager. Turns out she was not staying at a Disney resort. So I am assigned to the van to drive her to her resort off-site. I spent the next 20 minutes getting directions fed to me from my heavy-accented Puerto Rican co-cast member, while this lady is periodically puking into the bag. Interesting night, but watercraft assignment for college interns was usually interesting like that.
Sounds like a rough night. Taking someone to first aid and then dealing with a passenger who can't hold it together isn't what you expect. At least you got out of the cleanup part. Driving her to an off-site resort must have been a challenge too, especially with the directions and her ongoing situation. It reminds you that internships come with unexpected experiences.
This was about 15-16 years ago now, but when talking on headsets, you're supposed to use different codes for things. For example, a medical situation was usually a balloon for blood. I think it was there's a balloon in the parking lot. So, you can imagine my surprise when we get a call and saying, we have a code poo, Piglet is on the loose. Like what? Turns out some crying toddler-age kid was using the sandbox as his public bathroom. And when someone approached him, he just ran away. Edit, Spelline.
That's a pretty wild story. It reminds me of a time when my friends and I did a prank on each other with code words. We thought we were clever until things just spiraled out of control, and nobody understood what anyone was saying. In the end, we just ended up laughing about it. It's funny how kids can turn ordinary situations into something memorable, like a toddler making a run for it.
Not employee, but I was in Disney World with my wife like 2 years ago. At the beginning of the park, we got on the old-time train thing that takes you around the whole thing. While we were waiting, we met a lady who started telling us about the whole train and where it goes and the history of it, and I thought she was a worker, but it turns out that she just loves the train and rides it all day. Like she really loved that train. Who the heck pays the admission just to ride that train?
That's kind of funny. I can imagine meeting someone who just really enjoys something. It's like they found their own little joy in the park. A train enthusiast spending all day riding it seems a bit unusual. But hey, if that makes her happy, good for her. It's wild how people find their own ways to have fun, even if it seems odd to others. Just goes to show, everyone has their thing.
I was a cast member during 9/11. It was a scary time, but amazing how quickly WDW responded and closed the parks. I worked for one of the all-star resorts. They had Disney characters come to the resorts to entertain the kids on the day of 9/11 while parents could focus on news. In the following days, I was placed in the lobby of the hotel with a computer and phone to assist travelers find trains, rental cars, and buses home since air travel was suspended. Those families that could not get home were given free hotel accommodations for up to 5 days until airlines resumed full service.
That day was tough for everyone. I remember seeing how quickly Disney stepped up, bringing characters to cheer up the kids. It was all about trying to keep a sense of normalcy. Helping travelers find their way home was important. Everyone was in a bit of a panic. The charity shown by the hotel to accommodate those stuck was nice to see. Sometimes you just realize how a community can come together.
I did the management intern program in 2006. I got a call while managing over at Everest. It seems that the person measuring up front had a husband, wife, and child walk up trying to ride. The child was wearing one of those child pet leashes they have where it connects to a strap around the chest. Completely all over the place. Well, the cast member told them that the child was too short to ride. So they offered them a pass that allows one parent to cut the line and ride, then another pass to let the other parent cut the line. So someone could sit with the kid. They didn't want to do that as they both wanted to go together and get a picture done. They then walked the kid over to a fence and tied him to the fence and went to ride the ride. I show up and security and my boss are all standing around a child tied to a fence.
That's quite the scene. I remember a time when I was managing a similar situation. Parents were really determined about getting their picture together, even if it meant leaving their kid behind, which doesn't seem right. Just standing there, trying to figure out what to do while security was debating if they could unclip the kid without causing a scene. Some people really prioritize their moments over common sense.
I'm too late. I worked at the internal advertising agency for Disney parks for a year, and worked in the parks for a semester once. I have plenty of stories from inside the parks and outside. Overall, Disney keeps a very clean image and almost never screws up. Most of the stories I have are about guests, not Disney. I hate tourists.
It's interesting to hear about working at Disney. People always think the parks are perfect, but guests can be a handful. I remember a time at a theme park where a guest got really upset over a ride being closed. It was wild seeing how quickly things could escalate. It's funny how the magic can be dampened by a few unhappy visitors. Gotta keep a level head, I guess.
I was put on break from my position in Frontierland at Pecos Bills, which shares a break room with part of Adventureland as well. I desperately needed to go to the bathroom, but when I got back there, 30 or so employees were just standing around, blocking the entrance. Very unusual. Most people would be outside smoking or down in the tunnel grabbing food. I pushed my way to the front and was met by Disney security, telling me I can't go to the bathroom. Assholes. So I turn around to walk to a different bathroom down in the tunnel. And as I do, everyone sort of gasps and smiles. Turn back around. Tom Cruise and his daughter walk out the bathroom. My bathroom. Wasn't mad anymore after that. So that was by far the strangest thing. Tom Cruise and his daughter using my gross, tiny employee bathroom.
I get it, break rooms can be weird. That moment when you realize you can't even use the bathroom because of a crowd is annoying. But then, running into Tom Cruise? That's a solid twist. You expect stars to be in fancy places, not your regular employee bathroom. Makes for a crazy story to share later. At least it turned out better than just standing there frustrated. Definitely a memorable break.
A friend who works at Disney World Engineering once brought up a good point. If you think something is not likely to happen, a 1 in a million chance, consider that upwards of 10 to 15 million guests pass through the gates each year. They have to be prepared for everything, because chances are no matter how far-fetched it may seem, it will likely happen eventually.
That's an interesting perspective. It really puts things into context when you think about the sheer number of people visiting. Even the most unlikely events can become pretty likely with that many guests. It's a reminder of how important planning is in high-traffic places like that. You never really know what could happen, so better safe than sorry.
Hey, I also drove for KSR from January 2011 to May 2011. The worst thing, best thing, was one day when an elephant named Willie was in the first elephant yard. Willie was an exhibitionist. One day I got distracted because the baby mandrills, baboon-like monkeys, were out, so my attention was focused there spouting my facts. When I hear from the back of my safari, a sweet little innocent voice shout, "Mom, he has 5 legs." Sure enough, there was Willie, with his impressive willy swaying in the Florida sun. I was usually pretty good at coming up with a Disney response, but this one just took me by surprise. All I could do was turn off my mic and laugh.
That does sound awkward. Kids can be so blunt and honest. I can imagine trying to keep it professional while also wanting to laugh. Good reaction, though. It's one of those unexpected moments that sticks with you. I guess you just have to roll with it sometimes, especially in that kind of job. Can't really prepare for a surprise like Willie.
Oh my goodness. One time when my mother was little, she saw 2 cows going at it in the pasture across from their house, and her older sibling told her they were circus cows. You know how like circus elephants stand on each other? Now every time we see animals doing it, we shout, "Look, circus. Insert animals here." I have a picture of circus lorikeets at the zoo.
That's a funny story. Kids have such wild imaginations. I can picture your mom trying to wrap her head around circus cows. It must have stuck with her to bring it up later. Now you all shout out "circus" whenever you see animals acting up. Makes trips to the zoo a bit more entertaining. Those circus lorikeets sound like a sight, too. Gotta love the unique perspectives we grow up with.
Speaking of celebrities at Disney World, I once saw Kelly Ripa and her family at Epcot. They had one of those personal tour guides, but aside from that, it looked like any other family visiting the parks, including screaming children. One of her kids was having a really loud temper tantrum. That's actually the only reason I noticed her.
That sounds like a typical day at Disney. Even celebrities aren't immune to the chaos of family trips. Kids can really make a scene, and it just goes to show that everyone deals with those moments. I guess seeing them trying to navigate the park like any other family was a reminder that fame doesn't change everyday life.
Not completely unrelated, but please tell your sister thank you for me. We definitely did not have her, as we have only been to DL, but the amount of time my daughter's fairy godmother in training spent with her and making her feel special was such a big treat for us that it really inspired us to get annual passes. As a father, seeing how happy my daughter was made being turned into a princess was just as magical for me as it was for her. I can only imagine how horrible some parents can be, but every chance I get I like to thank especially the kids for what they do.
That's cool of you to appreciate the effort. It makes a difference when someone takes time to create those magical moments for kids. I get it, seeing your daughter so happy must have been really rewarding. It's nice to recognize the hard work people put into these experiences. Annual passes sound like a good idea if it's something your family enjoys. Keeps the magic going for sure.
My first week I was walking to the cafeteria, is still in the tunnel near the entrance, and past the character zoo. Snow White was sitting there in full makeup and wig, wearing only her bloomers, smoking a cigarette. Lost a lot of pixie dust on that one. A few days later, Susie Mouse was sitting in our break room, head off, reading a paper. Susie was a 22-year-old boy.
That sounds like a strange first week. I remember when I started somewhere new, and things felt off. One time, I saw someone in a costume acting totally different than their character. It's surprising how casual things can get in those environments. People are just there to have fun, I guess. You never know what you'll see or who you'll meet. Keeps it interesting, at least.
My husband did the college program, and he told me that while in the break room, he got to see Mickey Mouse take his head off. Ended up being an ancient chain-smoking grandma. I'm not sure I believe this story, just because it seems unlikely that Disney would allow someone to smoke while near their costumes. Made me laugh though.
That's a funny story. It's hard to picture Mickey Mouse just chilling in a break room. I get why you might doubt it though. Disney is usually pretty strict about that kind of thing. But it's definitely a wild image to think of an old grandma in the costume. Sometimes reality is stranger than fiction.
The thing about the ashes has been confirmed by posters on Reddit and elsewhere. Not only are they considered hazmat, and if you tell them you did it, they'll shut the ride down and clean, but they likely get cleaned up in a day or two anyway. Haunted Mansion has lots of Fuller's Earth dust, but not in anywhere you can really easily throw ashes.
It's interesting how people think they can get away with stuff like that. You'd think they'd realize how closely things are monitored at theme parks. I remember this one time a friend tried sneaking snacks into a movie theater. Long story short, the staff found out, and it turned into a whole thing. It's just not worth the trouble people go through for a bit of mischief. Keeping it chill usually works better.
Hey, not to be a bummer, but the Tower of Terror has a ridiculous number of redundancies. Not too sure about that whole bolt story. I have family that were Imagineers on the project, and I've seen the whole setup. The cables alone are like 10 inches or so in diameter to help deal with the stress of the cars being pulled downward.
That's interesting. It's wild how much work goes into those rides. I remember a friend who was obsessed with theme parks. We used to talk about designs and safety features. He'd go on and on about the mechanics behind everything. It made me appreciate the engineering even more. It's cool that you have family in that field. Bet they have some great stories too.
I was at Knott's Berry Farm the other day, sitting outside of a roller coaster waiting on my family riding it. And this guy gets off and starts vomiting in a trash can. The response was so quick. Someone swooped in with a barf bag and escorted him to first aid, and someone changed the trash can out, all in a matter of 5 minutes or so.
That sounds like a rough moment, but it's good to see people help out when things go sideways. I remember a time at a concert when someone fainted. The crowd just parted, and people jumped in to assist. It's surprising how quickly a group can come together in a messy situation. Shows you the kind of instinct people can have in unexpected moments.
Last time I was there, I actually got to see some artists working on painting a building in Animal Kingdom, which I thought was strange because it was the middle of the day and right out in the open. Absolutely not complaining though. I loved watching them. They had a little space around them roped off, and they were adding details to a building in the Asia section, I think, making it look weathered and old. It was awesome to see. Just surprising because I know how they like to keep things unseen.
That sounds pretty interesting. It's cool to see artists at work, especially in such a public place. It's not something you expect at a theme park, where they usually keep that stuff behind the scenes. Watching them add details to that building must have been a unique experience. I guess it's nice to have those little surprises that show the effort put into making everything look authentic.
There was a couple who were semi-regular customers at an old restaurant job of mine, and the wife would do something like this. She'd have a high chair or booster seat set up, and have a slice of pizza and a drink set out for a teddy bear. She'd baby talk the bear and cut up the pizza for it, and everything. It was a little odd, but she also looked like the saddest woman in the universe.
That's a pretty unique scene. It's interesting how some people find comfort in their routines. I wonder what that woman was going through to feel the need to interact with a teddy bear like that. Sometimes, we project our feelings onto objects or characters. It can be a coping mechanism, I guess. Makes you think about how we all have our own ways of dealing with things.
You're right about them not treating their employees all that well. I live so close to Disney that I can bike to Epcot with no problem, so a lot of my friends are cast members. One was fired because she broke her ankle, had to get a cast, and subsequently didn't fit the Disney look. She wasn't a face character or a character at all. Another was loading popcorn into a machine. A piece fell off and landed on his shirt. He walked away, noticed the popcorn on his shirt, picked it off, and popped it in his mouth. He was immediately termed for stealing from the company. Another worked on Splash Mountain and was in the control booth. Another CM came in and hit the E-stop. They don't have control room cameras, so he couldn't prove it wasn't him. They put him on thin ice and told him if anything else happened, he'd be termed. That was his first ever infraction. He got a flat tire on his way to work the following week, called in to let them know he'd be late, showed up, and they fired him after his shift.
That's rough. It's surprising how strict Disney can be with their staff over small things. I had a friend who got in trouble for something minor too. He was just trying to joke around, and it backfired hard. Companies really need to remember their employees are people. It's a shame to see good workers let go over stuff that feels petty. Makes you think twice about the work culture there.
I volunteered at a zoo when I was in high school. We had weird codes too, since media likes to listen in, and we didn't want to have a scandal if a tiger just got into the wrong holding area or something. Anyways, we also have a small insect exhibit that has black widows. Since the spiders are venomous and considered dangerous creatures, the volunteers there use the code for dangerous animal escape. The same code you'd use if a tiger or elephant escaped, as opposed to a goat or a bunny or something. So a couple minutes later, keepers show up with huge elephant tranquilizer guns. The volunteers that radioed then held up a cup with a piece of paper under it holding the now captured spider. Everyone had a laugh. Those were good times. The zoo with Slash is an awesome place.
That zoo story is pretty funny. I can picture the chaos for a second thinking a tiger got loose, but it's just a black widow. Using those big tranquilizer guns for a spider is overkill. Good call with the codes, though. You never know when a real animal might need handling. It sounds like you had a solid time volunteering there. Those moments stick with you, I guess.
You would be surprised by the Disney maniacs. I got to know a man who would come and take pictures from the TTC of the Magic Kingdom, but never go into the park itself. TTC is short for Ticket and Transportation Center. That is where the parking lot shuffles to, and you chose to take the monorail or the ferry boat across.
It's interesting how some people connect with places in different ways. This guy had a whole routine, just hanging out at the TTC, snapping photos of the Magic Kingdom. He didn't care about going inside. It was like he found some kind of joy in just being close to it all, soaking up the atmosphere without ever stepping through the gates. I guess you don't need a ticket to appreciate the magic happening around you.
There's no tunnel to the police station. They do have a holding room though. They'll just phone Anaheim PD to come pick you up. Since the boats in there are really floating, I'd like to see a guy reach one of the island areas without falling in when the boat sways. If he did it though, mad props. The skeletons, supposedly, used to be real, though only one, the pirate lying in bed, still is.
That sounds like a wild place. A holding room instead of a police station makes it seem kind of low-key. I can imagine a guy trying to balance on the boat, slipping and falling in. It's funny to think about. And real skeletons? That's a bit eerie but interesting. It would definitely make for a memorable story if someone managed to make it across without taking a dip.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.